Hello there, ladies and gentlemen. You're watching Al24 News live from Algiers. Coming up next, our World News Program. President Joe Biden thinks Russia will invade Ukraine and warned President Vladimir Putin that his country would pay a dear price, while Ukrainian president comments on Biden's talk. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today in Geneva amid ongoing fears that Russia could invade neighboring Ukraine. Humanitarian aid reached disaster-struck Tonga for the first time. The arrival of the badly needed assistance comes after Tongans cleared part of the runway by hand because equipment was destroyed or inaccessible. And Nepal recorded 12,338 new COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours, the highest daily infection number since the start of the pandemic, taking the nationwide infection tally to 887,769. Thank you for joining us. President Joe Biden thinks Russia will invade Ukraine and warned President Vladimir Putin that his country would pay a dear price, while Ukrainian president comments on Biden's talk. Marwa Belaiwa reports.
In a news conference, U.S. President Joe Biden predicted that any Russian troop movements across Ukraine's border would constitute an invasion and warned that Moscow would pay a heavy price for such an action.
But if they actually do what they're capable of doing with the force amassed on the border, it is going to be a disaster for Russia if they further invade Ukraine, and that our allies and partners are ready to impose severe cost and significant harm on Russia and the Russian economy. In addition to that, Putin has a stark choice. He either de-escalation or diplomacy, a confrontation of the consequences.
Biden sought to clarify his remarks at the start of the meeting at the White House on domestic policy after criticism from Republican lawmakers and Ukrainian officials that Biden's comments had invited limited military action by Russian President Vladimir Putin. Biden's comments came as U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken prepared to meet in Geneva with Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov to ease tensions. However, the latter is likely to fail.
The two things he said to me that he wants guarantees on. One is Ukraine will never be part of NATO. And two, that NATO there will not be strategic weapons stationed in Ukraine. Well, we can work out something on the second piece, pretending what he does along the Russian line as well, the Russian border in the European area.
Joe Biden stressed the need to be prepared for cyber attacks, gray zone attacks and actions by Russian soldiers not wearing their uniforms, as he claims that Russia has a long history of using measures other than direct military action to invade. The conference was the latest White House effort to emphasize Biden's comments he made a day earlier, suggesting that a minor incursion by Russia into Ukraine territory could result in a more measured response by the United States and its allies.
Russia will be held accountable if it invades, and it depends on what it does. It's one thing if it's a minor incursion and then we end up having a fight about what to do and not do, etc.
Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has hit back at comments made by the President Joe Biden about a minor incursion by Russia into his country, as he tweeted, "We want to remind the great powers that there are no minor incursions and small nations, just as there are no minor casualties and little grief from the loss of loved ones. I say this as President of a great power." The news conference came at a critical moment in Europe as Russia has amassed troops near the Ukrainian border, and a series of talks in Europe last week failed to ease tensions.
Fears over Russia's actions increase as talk between the West and Russia last week failed to reach a breakthrough, with some of Moscow's demands rejected as non-starters. Russia has made a raft of demands to Western governments, including that Ukraine should never join NATO and that the defensive alliance's military activities should be limited in member states, including Poland.
Moscow could seek autonomy for Donetsk and Luhansk regions. Russia wants removal of NATO presence in Eastern Europe. US and NATO want a pullback of Russian troops at Ukrainian border.
Tensions between Ukraine and Russia are at an all-time high, with fears that Moscow may launch an invasion fueled by a Russian force buildup near the two countries' borders. Ukraine has warned that Russia is attempting to destabilize the country in advance of any military invasion plans. Russia has been cautioned repeatedly by Western nations not to take any harsh actions against Ukraine.
Putin accepted such a decision, which is concentrating on our troops to strengthen our borders. But I think he just wants protection for the country. If a war starts, we are ready.
And now, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken held talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov today, Friday, in Geneva, amid ongoing fears that Russia could invade neighboring Ukraine. The two diplomats met briefly at Hotel President Wilson, where they discussed whether diplomacy can still resolve the crisis. Marwa Blaiwa again.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken held a 90-minute bilateral meeting earlier today in Geneva with his Russian counterpart Sergei Lavrov, in which the U.S. sought to convince Russia to de-escalate the situation at the Ukrainian border. The United States has called on Russia to pull back thousands of troops it has massed near the border with Ukraine, warning any incursion would be met with a swift, severe and a united response from the White House and its partners.
We are, all of us, equally committed to the path of diplomacy and dialogue to try to resolve our differences. But we're also committed, if that proves impossible, and Russia decides to pursue aggression against Ukraine, to a united, swift, and severe response. I do want to take this opportunity to share directly with you the common view of allies and partners, as well as concrete ideas to address some of the concerns that you've raised, as well as the deep concerns that many of us have about Russia's actions.
Moscow denies it is planning an attack and demands that the US-headed NATO military alliance end activity in Eastern Europe and Ukraine, as well as never embrace the former Soviet Republic as a new member. Both Blinken and Lavrov opened the door to further dialogue, even though it was expected that the talks would fail. Blinken described the discussion as frank and substantive, calling it a candid exchange of concerns and ideas, while Lavrov described the talks as constructive and useful.
You mentioned one of the recent statements during the European tour, that you don't expect a breakthrough from this meeting. We also don't expect a breakthrough from this meeting. We are waiting for answers to our proposals. The proposals are extremely specific, and we expect the same answers fully in line with the commitment taken at a high level on the indivisibility of security problems. I would be very interested to hear how the US interprets these commitments.
Antony Blinken had press conference after meeting Russia's Foreign Minister Lavrov over Ukraine crisis.
Met here in Geneva with President Putin. He's spoken to him on the phone or via video conference on a number of occasions. And if we conclude, and the Russians conclude, that the best way to resolve things is through a further conversation between them, we're certainly prepared to do that.
Lavrov said that Blinken promised that Moscow will receive a written response to its concrete security demands next week, as the two diplomats also agreed to meet again next week.
Humanitarian aid reached disaster-struck Tonga for the first time. The arrival of the badly needed assistance comes after Tongans cleared part of the runway by hand because equipment was destroyed or inaccessible. More with Nabil Khazini.
After 5 days of isolation from the rest of the world, help from abroad starts to arrive in Tonga. A New Zealand Navy ship carrying 250,000 liters of water arrived in the island, bringing life-saving supplies to the South Pacific archipelago. 6 days after it was devastated by a volcanic eruption and tsunami that pulled its water resources.
There would be sanitation, water purification, shelter, hygiene kits, personal hygiene kits, food.
And just sit there and do nothing. So we've decided to do what the best we can, and in this instance, water was the first thing that we could do.
A ceremony was held after China's relief supplies arrived in Tonga. Water and food supplies coming from China were received in Tonga. The Red Cross Society of China has also donated a total of $100,000 of emergency cash to the country following the same amount offered by New Zealand.
This is the first batch of emergency relief supplies received by the Tonga government after the disaster, which carries the special friendship between the two countries.
The humanitarian mission carried out by several nations can be complex due to the pandemic. An Australian aid flight was forced to return to base because of a positive COVID-19 case on board. Tonga is one of the few countries that has kept the coronavirus away.
The containers, for example, get hooked on at the ship end, the crane will swing it out, and then Tongans on the jetty will disconnect the containers and take them away.
The arriving assistance found its way to land in Tonga after the country has cleared its main airport from ash after the eruption. But pollution still presents a risk to drinking water and air quality. Around 80% of the population in Tonga has now been affected by the natural disaster.
Nepal recorded 12,338 new COVID-19 cases in the last 24 hours, the highest daily infection number since the start of the pandemic, taking the nationwide infection tally to 887,769. According to the Ministry of Health and Population, 27,497 tests were conducted. The ministry said that 649 infected people have been recovered and 4 persons succumbed to the disease. Nepal's capital shut schools, ordered citizens to carry vaccination cards in public, banned religious festivals, and instructed hotel guests to be tested every 3 days as it battles its biggest COVID-19 outbreak. The United Nations said destruction caused by the typhoon Rai in the Philippines had been badly underestimated in initial assessments, tripling the number of people seriously affected to 9 million. Miriam Zian reports.
On the 16th of December, a super typhoon struck the Philippines' central archipelago, wreaking havoc on the region. The United Nations initiated a campaign to raise $107 million in help for victims after a week the typhoon battered the archipelago's southern and central areas. However, the UN resident coordinator in the Philippines, Gustavo Gonzalez, announced on Thursday that the aim would be altered after more than 66 field assessments revealed that the destruction was significantly worse than previously assumed.
We realized that we have badly underestimated the scale of devastation. So we can say today, after 1 month, that the Typhoon Rai was the world's second deadliest disaster of.
Humanitarian organizations have been collaborating with the government to give food, water, tents, and building materials. However, due to the magnitude of the tragedy, a lack of power and communications in some places, and exhausted government resources following the COVID-19 response efforts to deliver help have been hindered. A spike in Omicron is also isolating aid personnel and making travel more difficult.
The current ratio of COVID-19 test positivity is over 46%, and many humanitarian responders, humanitarian teams, members of my team, myself, we are testing positive, which is restricting staff movement and, of course, is affecting our operations at the field level.
The Philippines is one of the most vulnerable countries to climate change, with an average of 20 storms per year. And experts have long warned that typhoons are increasing more rapidly as the world becomes warmer because of human-caused climate change.
After a close meeting with Algerian investors in Al-Wad on Thursday, the U.S. mission has landed in Hassim Saoud as part of the Algerian-American agenda on the pretext of agricultural collaboration. The visit took place in Gassitwil and more particularly in Atlas Farm, which is about 140 kilometers from Hassim Saoud in the province of Wurgla. Many crops were presented in Atlas Farm, including durum wheat, sunflower, growing corn, silage, sugar, beet, cotton, and many others. The visit also displayed on how the agricultural machinery works to fertilize the land and the system of watering the land using pivots to grow different kinds of agrarian products. After the visit, the U.S. expedition headed back to Hassim Saoud to fly to Algiers in preparation for the next B2B meeting, which will be held in the capital, Algiers.
And first time after I don't know how many thousand years, we came for the Hassim Saoud, for the middle of the Sahara Desert. And we bring technology, agriculture technology from the America to the Algeria for how do we plant it, how do we harvest it, and how do we grow it, and how do we decrease for cost, how do we increase for the yield?
Every year we separated our crops planning. For example, some parts we grow it is cereal, the other parts we grow it is generally animal feed segmentation crops. What that's corn slash is beet slash, also is oat slash. We did.
Like you're looking at the irrigation system, it's the way to go with big projects like this. It's the center pivot. There is no other, basically, lucrative or another system that makes more sense than the center pivot. And you can see the result. I mean, this pivot, it's doing a good job, and we're here with Renki. We're trying to bring the best of the best.
And now it's time for some news about COVID-19 in this report by Mariam Zian.
Queensland has documented 13 additional COVID-19 deaths as the state modifies restrictions to make boosters more readily available. There are also 855 persons being treated in hospitals, with 54 in intensive care units and 22 on ventilators. Queenslanders will be eligible for a COVID vaccination booster injection 3 months after their second dose. According to the Prime Minister, the state also confirmed more than 16,000 new infections, bringing the total number of active cases in the state to more than 86,000. Most people who died in the latest period were aged 50 and above. Beginning Friday, restaurants and bars will close early in Tokyo and a dozen of other areas across Japan, as efforts to contain the spread of the Omicron strain of COVID-19 to new metropolitan areas. The restriction is the first since September and will last till mid-February, including many regions of the country. The Health Ministry approved Pfizer vaccinations for children aged 5 to 11 who became more exposed to infections. Despite of complaints and opposition, Austria's parliament authorized making COVID-19 vaccines mandatory for adults starting from next month, making it the first European country to do so. The policy was introduced in November in an attempt to raise the country's immunization rate. However, tens of thousands have marched against obligatory vaccination in regular weekend rallies. However, the case is different for Wales. As Omicron cases continue to drop, more restrictions on people's daily lives have been eased in Wales. Pubs and restaurants can now operate without social distancing, and all restrictions on sport events have been lifted, allowing thousands of fans to return to stadiums around the country. And according to the First Minister Mark Drakeford, the country is past the tipping point and the situation has greatly improved.
And for more news around the world, let's follow this report by Sofiane Kintouri.
At least 70 people were killed and about 59 people were injured in a blast in western Ghana on Thursday after a motorcycle collided with a vehicle carrying explosives. According to police, the majority of the victims have been rescued and are being treated at various hospitals and clinics. Their conditions were not disclosed any further. According to a statement from the Sovereign Council, Sudan's military chief General Abdel Fattah al-Burhan announced Thursday the formation of new government, which included 15 ministers. The decision included the appointment of Ali Siddiq Ali as Minister of Foreign Affairs and Muhammad Abdullah Mahmoud as Minister of Energy and Oil. The Serbian government has dropped its plan to build a massive lithium mine, the Prime Minister has announced, following weeks of public protest over the $2 billion project's environmental impact that was going to build by Rio Tinto. The surprise U-turn from the government comes months before expected national elections, as President Alexander Vucic's administration tries to shore up support from voters after a series of major protests that gained traction across large swaths of the Balkan country. Peru declared an environmental emergency on Thursday after announcing that 21 beaches on the Pacific coast were contaminated by oil spill, following waves caused by the eruption of an underwater volcano near from Tonga. An estimated 6,000 barrels were spilled, while the affected area is far more extensive than 80,000 square meters that were initially reported. Rohingya refugees from Bangladesh who arrived in Indonesia last month have told media outlets of their harrowing journey by boat. It's worth mentioning that Bangladesh authorities have bulldozed more than 3,000 Rohingya run shops since last month, as struggling refugee families voiced their dismay at the demolitions.
And to some economy news in this report by Nabil Khazini.
South Korea has unveiled a supplementary budget to help the small businesses and self-employed people. The South Korean ministry announced that around 12 trillion won budget will be used to help small businesses owners and compensate their losses caused by the extension of virus-related measures. The extra budget represents the total government spending, which would increase to a record 621.7 trillion won this year, an 11.4% increase from the 2021 original budget. Technology company Intel plans to invest $20 billion to build a new chip-making facility in Ohio in the United States. The American company took the step amid rising demand for digital products, and while global chip shortage have amplified the need for more manufacturing. Intel CEO Pat Gelsinger said the company expects the site to become the largest silicon manufacturing location on the planet. Amid the escalating tension in Ukraine's border, gas prices might soar if Russia decides to invade Ukraine. An invasion that would trigger immediate fears of sanctions from Washington on Russia's vast energy resources and damage to the region's energy infrastructure. Gasoline prices have already started to rise higher in recent days, of an average of 3.32 a gallon on Wednesday. Airbus has taken an unprecedented decision. The aircraft manufacturer has cancelled an order for 50 A321 NEOs from Qatar Airways. This comes after its dispute with the Qatari company about its A350 jumbo jets. Qatar Airways is seeking $618 million in compensation for the 21 grounded jets, plus $4 million a day as the row continues.
And finally, the Algerian national football team has been eliminated in the first round of the Africa Cup of Nations CAN 2021 after its defeat to Ivory Coast 1-3 in a match counting for the third and last day of Group E, played Thursday at Japoma Stadium of Douala, Cameroon. Nabil Khazini reports.
After a sore 3-1 defeat against Ivory Coast, reigning champions Algeria were sent out of the African Cup of Nations.
What can I say? We are all upset. The Algerian people is upset. Everyone is upset. The staff, the players, all are upset, but this is football. God willing, we will be back.
Nicolas Pepe's fine solo goal early in the second half put the game out of sight. The Elephants led 2-0 at half-time thanks to Ibrahim Sangari Hida.
We have to raise our heads. We must stay united. We won together, now we lose. We lose together. We know that all Algerian fans are behind us, and it doesn't matter for those who aren't. We are united, and we will be back, God willing.
Sofiane Bendibka pulled the goal back for Algeria in the 73rd minute, a goal that wasn't enough for a team that needed a win to stay in the African competition.
This is something we have to swallow after the game. It is hard for us because we are not used to losing. It is a bitter taste. It is horrible.
Algeria's departure comes just after traveling to Cameroon on a 35-match unbeaten run and looking to surpass Italy's all-time record of 37.
That's all for me, Nadia Kasmi, and the rest of the team. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.